New York, September 2009. A convoy of trucks rolls into Bedford, one of the wealthiest suburbs outside Manhattan. Workers start unloading rugs, wall hangings, leather couches. And then, piece by piece, a massive white Bedouin tent, patterned with camels and palm trees. It's going up on a 213-acre estate that belongs to a real estate developer named Donald Trump. The man the tent is for has just addressed the United Nations General Assembly. He has ruled his country for 40 years. He has outlasted 8 American presidents. He has more money than most nations on Earth.
دولة واحدة ديمقراطية لليهود وللمسلمين والفلسطينيين والمسيحيين وغيرهم زي لبنان. هذا حل غير عملي، الدولتين لا يمكن. ما فيش دولتين متجاورتين، هن من الآن متداخلتين تمام التداخل.
And right now, he cannot find a single place in the entire New York metropolitan area that will let him sleep in his own tent. Central Park said no, New Jersey said no, a Manhattan penthouse deal collapsed. Now here he is, reduced to renting a Westchester lawn through a shell company, because if anyone in Bedford finds out who's actually renting it, that deal collapses too. They find out. The tent goes up. Then a stop work order comes down. The tent gets torn down. Then, bizarrely, someone puts it back up overnight. Then it comes down for good. He never spends a single night there. He sleeps at the Libyan mission in Manhattan instead, like everyone else's dictator, in a building, like everyone else. This is Muammar Gaddafi. In 4 decades, he had personally nationalized his nation's oil, built free hospitals, given away free apartments, and convinced an entire generation of Libyans he was untouchable. And in the last 2 years of his life, he can't even pitch a tent in New York. So how does a man go from commanding the loyalty of an entire desert nation to being turned away like an unwanted guest by the very people he spent decades trying to impress? To answer that, we have to go back to a tent that actually worked. A tent in the middle of nowhere, 60 years earlier, where nobody even bothered writing down the date he was born. There is no birth certificate for Muammar Gaddafi. His parents were Bedouin nomads from a small tribe near the town of Sirte on Libya's northern coast. People who moved with the seasons and didn't register their children with any government because there wasn't much of a government to register with. Historians have landed on June 7, 1942 as the closest thing to an official date, but even that is a best guess stitched together decades later. Libya at the time was one of the poorest countries on the planet. It had spent decades as a colonial afterthought, first Italian, then split between French and British control after World War II. When it finally became independent in 1951, the new king, Idris, made a deal with his former occupiers. Keep your military bases here and we'll get along fine. Then, in 1955, geologists found oil. Extraordinary oil, some of the highest quality crude in the world. American and British companies rushed in. The country started making money. The money did not reach the people who lived in the desert. Young Muammar watched all of this from the outside, literally. He was the only Bedouin kid in his school in the town of Seba, and other students mocked him for it. He didn't fold. If anything, the opposite. He doubled down on being a Bedouin, wore it like armor, and started paying very close attention to a man on the radio. That man was Gamal Abdel Nasser, president of Egypt, who had just kicked out a king of his own and was talking, loudly, about Arab nationalism, about kicking Western powers out of Arab land, about a new kind of pride. Gaddafi was hooked. He organized his own study groups in school. He got briefly arrested for organizing anti-monarchy demonstrations. And when the door to a normal career closed, he found another one, the military. At the Royal Military Academy in Benghazi, he found what he needed, a room full of other angry, ambitious young officers who'd also watched their country's oil money disappear into a king's pocket. He gathered a small circle of them. They called themselves the Free Officers, borrowing Nasser's own name for his movement in Egypt. They spent 5 years planning. 5 years, and Libyan intelligence noticed nothing. Here's a detail worth holding on to. Almost none of the men in that founding circle would still be standing next to Gaddafi by the end. Some would flee the country, some would quietly step back from politics. At least one would try to remove him and be killed for it. September 1st, 1969. King Idris is out of the country, getting medical treatment in Turkey. The free officers move. It takes almost no time and almost no bloodshed. They seize the royal palace, the radio station, the key government buildings. Gaddafi goes on the air himself and declares the monarchy finished. He is 27 years old. He gives himself the rank of colonel, a rank he will hold, by choice, for the rest of his life, even as he becomes one of the most powerful men on the continent. 12 young officers form a revolutionary command council. Gaddafi chairs it. Functionally, he now runs the country. And he moves fast. He shuts down the American and British military bases. He expels around 20,000 Italians who'd stayed in Libya since the colonial era. He nationalizes foreign-owned land and banks. Then, he goes after the real prize: oil. Under the old system, foreign companies drilled Libyan oil, paid a modest tax, and kept the rest. Gaddafi flips the arrangement. He nationalizes 51% of every foreign oil operation in the country. Not all of it, because Libya doesn't have enough of its own engineers yet to run the fields alone, but enough to make sure Libya, not Washington or London, owns the majority stake. Then he does something even bolder. He unilaterally raises the price Libya charges for its own oil. Take it or leave it. The companies take it, and the rest of the oil-producing world watches, stunned, as a 27-year-old colonel just rewrote the rules of the entire global energy market. Within a few years, that same logic, producer nations, not buyer nations, setting the price, becomes the founding idea behind OPEC. Libya's population at the time is only around 3 million people, and now oil money is flooding in almost faster than it can be spent. What happens next is the part of the story people still argue about. GDP explodes. Hospitals, schools, and universities go up across the country. Multi-generation families that had been living in tents for generations start moving into government-built apartments for free. School becomes mandatory through age 9, and university becomes completely free. Basic groceries are subsidized for large families. Medicine is handed out free at state pharmacies. And then there's the detail almost every account of Gaddafi mentions. Gasoline, at one point, cost less than bottled water, somewhere around 14 to 15 cents a liter. By some estimates, by the late 1970s, Libya has a higher per capita income than Britain, Italy, or Japan, the highest on the entire African continent. For a while, Gaddafi is not just accepted, he is beloved. And nobody seems to mind, at first, that there are no political parties, no labor unions, no independent press, no public demonstrations that he didn't organize himself. He's banned alcohol, he's banned Western music, he's introduced Islamic law. The trade seems to make sense to a lot of people. Give up your voice, and in exchange, get a house, an education, cheap fuel, and food on the table. Work, eat, pray, raise your children. What else does a person need? That question, what else does a person need, is about to become the central problem of Gaddafi's entire life, because he's about to answer it for himself, in writing, in a way that will eventually destroy everything he's built. In 1973, Gaddafi puts his political philosophy on paper. He calls it the Green Book. His pitch? Western democracy is a sham, a handful of parties fighting over power while pretending to represent everyone. Soviet-style communism is just as broken. He proposes something new, a third universal theory. No parties, no parliament, no president, just the people governing themselves directly through local committees that funnel ideas upward into a national congress. He calls this system Jamahiriya, roughly, rule of the masses. In 1977, he renames the entire country the Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya and announces something remarkable. He is stepping down. Officially, there is no head of state anymore. Power belongs to the people. On paper, it's radical. It's also, on paper, completely unworkable, because a system with no leader at all has no way to actually make a final decision. Someone always has to say yes or no. So quietly, alongside the official structure of congresses and committees, Gaddafi builds a second invisible one: revolutionary committees. You won't find them mentioned anywhere in the Green Book. They report to a central committee, and the central committee reports to exactly one person, the leader of the revolution, who, officially, doesn't exist anymore, but who is, in every way that matters, still Gaddafi. The people running these revolutionary committees? Overwhelmingly his relatives, his tribe, men personally loyal to him. So the rule of the masses turns out to be one man's rule with extra steps. And those committees don't just administer policy, they police loyalty. They operate inside schools, universities, workplaces, and the military, and they carry real punitive power. Anyone can be accused of anything: plotting against the state, spying for a foreign power, and disappear without trial. This is also where the story turns dark in a more specific way. Between 1975 and 1986, Gaddafi survives at least 7 assassination attempts. After the first one, he builds a secret police unit with a mandate that goes far beyond Libya's borders. Track down dissidents wherever they've fled and eliminate them. One former foreign minister flees to Egypt, thinking he's safe. Libyan agents grab him off a street in Cairo, stuff him into a car with Libyan plates, and drive him back across the border. He is never seen again. The message to every Libyan abroad is unmistakable. There is no outside. We will find you. Remember those free officers from the founding circle? This is where most of them scatter, pushed out, fled, or worse. By the end, only 2 of the original conspirators are still standing beside him. Everyone else who once stood at the center of his revolution either quietly stepped away or paid for staying too close. Domestically, Gaddafi is tightening his grip. Abroad, he's expanding it. And this is where things get genuinely dangerous, not just for Libyans, but for the entire world. Gaddafi sees himself as the patron of every liberation movement on Earth, and he starts writing checks accordingly. Palestinian militant factions, the Irish Republican Army, the Basque separatist group ETA, Italy's Red Brigades, West Germany's Red Army faction. By some estimates, Libya funds around 30 different armed groups internationally, some genuinely fighting colonial occupation, others straightforwardly terrorist organizations by any definition, including groups that target civilians. Gaddafi hands out Libyan diplomatic passports to some of them. Commit an act of violence abroad, and you have a legal escape hatch, diplomatic immunity, straight back to Tripoli. For years, the world absorbs this as background noise. Then, on April 5, 1986, a bomb explodes on the dance floor of a nightclub in West Berlin called La Belle, a club known to be popular with American soldiers stationed in Germany. 3 people are killed, 2 American servicemen and a Turkish woman. Around 229 others are injured, some losing limbs in the blast. U.S. intelligence intercepts communications between the Libyan embassy in East Berlin and Tripoli, messages congratulating each other on the operation's success. President Reagan has heard enough. 10 days later, American warplanes hit targets across Tripoli and Benghazi, including a strike on Gaddafi's own residential compound. Gaddafi survives with minor injuries. His infant adopted daughter, reportedly, does not, though even that detail is contested to this day, with unresolved questions about whether she actually died in the strike. Here's the thing about humiliating a man who believes he's untouchable. He doesn't forget it. He doesn't forgive it. And he waits. He waits 2 years. December 21st, 1988. Pan Am Flight 103 is cruising over the Scottish town of Lockerbie when a bomb hidden in the cargo hold detonates. The plane breaks apart in mid-air. 259 people aboard die. 11 more die on the ground, where wreckage rains down on the town below. 270 people. Investigators trace the bomb back to Libyan intelligence agents. Then, less than a year later, on September 19, 1989, a French airliner, UTA Flight 772, explodes over the Sahara Desert in Niger. All 170 people aboard are killed. This bombing, too, is traced back to Libya. This is the moment everything changes. The United Nations imposes sweeping sanctions. Libya's oil-dependent economy, which, remember, never really diversified beyond crude, starts to buckle. Libya's overseas assets get frozen. The country that once had one of the highest standards of living in Africa is suddenly locked out of the global financial system. And here's an irony worth sitting with. The same man who spent 2 decades nationalizing private industry inside Libya had, quietly, been building an enormous private investment portfolio outside it. Stakes in European giants like British Petroleum, Volkswagen, and Fiat. Property abroad, yachts, cars. The revolutionary who abolished private ownership at home turns out to be one of Europe's biggest private shareholders. By the early 2000s, the sanctions have done their damage, and Gaddafi makes a calculation that will define the last decade of his rule. It's time to come in from the cold. He does something almost nobody expected. He publicly takes responsibility for Lockerbie. He agrees to pay roughly $2.7 billion in compensation to victims' families, around $10 million per family. He pays out further settlements for Labelle and for UTA 772. He admits, for the first time, that Libya spent nearly 3 decades secretly pursuing weapons of mass destruction, chemical and nuclear programs the US and Britain had accused him of for years, and which he had always denied. In exchange, the sanctions come off, and the world, remarkably quickly, welcomes him back. In 2003, Libya is elected to a rotating seat on the UN Security Council, officially, in part, for its cooperation against terrorism. The same man who once funded 30 militant groups is now sitting inside the institution built to fight political violence. He starts touring the world's capitals, Rome, Paris, Moscow, Brussels, Kyiv, and everywhere he goes, that Bedouin tent goes with him, pitched in parks near the world's most famous landmarks. Steps from the Champs-Élysées in Paris, inside the walls of the Kremlin in Moscow. This is also the era of the version of Gaddafi that becomes almost a caricature. The elaborate outfits, designed with input from an actual team of stylists. The all-female bodyguard corps. The golden furniture, a solid gold diwan, gold fly swatters, a private jet with silver interior paneling. Camels traveling with him so he can start every morning with fresh camel's milk. He's no longer just a head of state. He's become a spectacle, and, increasingly, the world's most bizarre diplomatic guest. Someone leaders host but don't quite trust. Someone who says outrageous things in international forums and dares anyone to call him on it. Which brings us back to where we started. New York, 2009. The tent that got turned away from Central Park. The tent that got shut down at Trump's estate. Even the compensation he'd paid, even the reforms, even the UN seat, none of it buys him a place to actually sleep. He spends the night at the Libyan mission instead. He is welcomed in every capital in the world, technically. He is at home in none of them. Back in Libya, meanwhile, the reinvention isn't just diplomatic, it's economic too, and it's about to blow up in his face for a completely different reason. Post-sanctions, Gaddafi does something that would have been unthinkable from the young colonel who once nationalized everything in sight. He announces a shift toward privatization. Roughly half of Libya's state-owned enterprises are slated to go private. Decades of socialist economics, reversed almost overnight. It doesn't fix anything. Instead, it manages to alienate almost everyone at once. The old guard inside his own regime is exhausted by his unpredictability. One policy reversal after another, no one ever quite sure what tomorrow brings. Islamists resent his interpretation of religion. The remaining leftists in the country see him as having betrayed socialism entirely. Liberals want the thing he's never allowed: an actual constitution, actual elections. And an entire generation of young Libyans, who've grown up under a man who was already ruling before their parents were born, want something simpler: freedom of speech and a job. To them, increasingly, Gaddafi isn't a revolutionary anymore. He's a punchline. The bodyguards, the plastic surgery, the outfits, the tent that keeps getting turned away. All that's needed now is a spark. It comes from an old wound that Libya's government thought it had buried: Abu Salim prison. Back in 1996, after a prisoner uprising, guards opened fire, and by most human rights estimates, somewhere around 1,200 inmates were killed in the following hours. For years, the regime denied it happened. Families were kept in the dark for over a decade, some only learning secondhand that a relative had died, with no body ever returned. In February 2011, security forces arrest the lawyer who had been representing those families and pushing for accountability. It's a small, almost bureaucratic act of repression, the kind Gaddafi's regime had carried out 1,000 times before without consequence. This time, it doesn't stay small. People pour into the streets of Benghazi demanding his release. And in a move that's almost unbelievably theatrically Gaddafi, he personally climbs into a bulldozer and drives it through the wall of a Tripoli prison holding political detainees, calling it on camera Freedom Day.
أنا طلبت من الجماهير تمشي تاخذ أولادها وتقبض على اللي قرروا بأولادها. لكن نهار تبدأ ليبيا في خطر وحدتها الوطنية في خطر.
It's a stunning piece of theater. It is also, within days, completely irrelevant, because the protests aren't really about one lawyer anymore. The Arab Spring has already been sweeping through Tunisia and Egypt, toppling leaders who'd look just as permanent as Gaddafi. Now it's Libya's turn, and there's no bulldozer big enough to stop it. His response this time isn't a publicity stunt. It's live ammunition fired into unarmed crowds. Within weeks, this isn't a protest anymore. It's a civil war. The international response is swift, and for Gaddafi, devastating. The UN Security Council authorizes a no-fly zone over Libya. NATO, led primarily by France and Britain, begins airstrikes, officially to protect civilians, but functionally providing the rebels with the air power Gaddafi's own forces don't have. The International Criminal Court issues an arrest warrant for Gaddafi himself. He gives a defiant speech, vowing to hunt down the rebels inch by inch, house by house. It doesn't matter. By late August, opposition forces, with NATO air cover clearing their path, take Tripoli. Gaddafi is down to 2 cities, Bani Walid and his own hometown, Sirte, where his story began more or less, 69 years earlier, in a Bedouin tent outside its walls. On October 20th, 2011, he tries to break out of Sirte in a convoy, reportedly hoping to escape toward Niger. NATO aircraft spot the column and strike it. Gaddafi is wounded, hit in the head and legs, and captured alive by rebel fighters. What happens over the next several hours is filmed, in fragments, on phone cameras. He is beaten, dragged through the streets. Sand is poured into his wounds. He dies from his injuries. His body is displayed publicly, for 4 days, in a commercial meat locker in the city of Misrata, so that people from across the country can come and see, with their own eyes, that the man who ruled them for 42 years is actually gone. Go back to that tent in Bedford, New York, 2 years before his death. A man who once nationalized an entire nation's oil, who once had the confidence to unilaterally reprice the global energy market at 27 years old, reduced to being politely, then not so politely, evicted from a suburban lawn. That wasn't really about a tent. It was the entire trajectory of his life, compressed into one afternoon. A man who spent decades trying to buy legitimacy, respect, permanence, and who never quite got to keep any of it. He built free housing for millions of Libyans. He also built a surveillance state that hunted its critics across international borders. He nationalized an economy for the many and quietly built a private fortune abroad, rivaling most nations' treasuries. He funded groups that called themselves liberation movements, and some that were, by any honest measure, terrorist organizations targeting ordinary civilians. He confessed, apologized, paid billions in reparations, and rebuilt his legitimacy just fast enough to be readmitted to the very institutions that once sanctioned him. None of it, in the end, bought him a place to actually rest. And Libya, 13 years later, still hasn't found one either. The country splintered the moment the single point of control at its center, Gaddafi himself, was removed. No transition plan existed because none had ever been allowed to exist. Every institution capable of holding the country together had spent 42 years being deliberately hollowed out so that all power ran through exactly one man. When that man was gone, there was nothing left standing behind him. Rival governments, armed militias, human trafficking networks, and extremist groups filled the vacuum he left. So, the question this story started with, who's really responsible for what Libya became, doesn't have a clean answer. Was it foreign intervention that broke the country? Or was it a system built, deliberately, over 4 decades, to make sure that nothing could survive its founder? Maybe the more useful question is the one this story keeps circling back to. What does it cost a country when its entire government is really just one man's tent, impressive while it's standing, and gone completely the moment no one's left to hold it up?